we see so much suffering in the world. There's famine, there's wars, there's disease, there's bereavement. So in so many ways we suffer. But where is that suffering actually experienced? It's all experienced in the mind. Supposing we have a very painful cancer. It's not the body that is suffering. The body is jada, the body is insentient. It has no awareness of anything. Whatever is causing the pain in the body is sending electrochemical signals to the brain. That's all that's happening in the body. For the body, it's indifferent what are those electrochemical messages. This is assuming, I mean, this is from a normal worldly point of view, assuming that the body is out there, whereas Bhagavan says it's all in the mind actually. But even if we say the body is, the neurons are firing and sending messages of pain to the brain, it's we who suffer as a result of that. Why we suffer? Because of likes and dislikes. If we like something, it causes us pleasure. If we dislike it, it causes us pain. Without likes and dislikes, there would be no pleasure or pain. It's all, and likes and dislikes are a feature of the mind. So ultimately, it's all in the mind suffering. We consider, for example, war to be a very bad thing. Why do we consider it to be bad? Because we don't want to suffer. We don't want ourselves to suffer. And because we don't want ourselves to suffer, we also don't like to see other people suffering. So we consider war to be bad. But if we were free of likes and dislikes, what would it matter if someone drops a hydrogen bomb or whatever happens? It's our likes and dislikes are the cause of pleasure and pain. So it's all in the mind this is happening. But according to Bhagavan, happiness is our real nature. So when happiness is our real nature, why we suffer? In the 14th paragraph of Nāṉ Yār, who am I? Bhagavan begins by saying, Sukham embadu ātma-vichara sarupame. That is, what is called happiness is the very nature of oneself, Atman. Sukhamum atma-sarupamum verandru. Happiness and the real nature of oneself are not different. Atma-sukham, that's the happiness which is oneself, alone exists. Adve satyam, that alone is real. Prapanja porul ondrilavadu sukham embadu kidiyadu. There's no happiness in anything in the world, or no happiness can be obtained from anything in the world. We think we obtain happiness. We have a desire for our neighbour's got a better car than us, so we work hard and we buy the latest model and we're happy. Is the happiness there in the car? The car is just a piece of metal with some moving parts and comfortable seats or whatever. There's no happiness in that. It's our desire for it. When the desire is fulfilled, we experience happiness. So Bhagavan says there's not any happiness in anything in the world. It's due to our avivika, our lack of discernment, our lack of proper discrimination, but we think we get happiness from those things. And then he says, Manam veliyil varumpodu dukkate ātma-vichara. That means when the mind comes out, it experiences misery. In an earlier paragraph, he had said, quite a somewhat similar sentence. He said, Manam atma-sarupatinindru velivaram podu jagam tondram. That is when the mind comes out from our real nature, the real nature of ourselves, the world appears. So when the mind comes out, the world appears, and when the mind comes out, we experience misery. Bhagavan equates the two. And later on in this 14th paragraph, he ends by saying, Jagam embadu nineve, what is called the world is nothing but thoughts. Jagam marayam podu adabdu ninevatra podu, that is when the world disappears, that is when there's no thoughts. Manam anandate anubhavikiridu, the mind experiences kindridu, the mind experiences ananda, happiness. Jagam tondrum podu adu dukkate anubhav, when the world appears, it experiences misery. So according to Bhagavan, the very rising of our mind is misery. That is the cause of happiness, of misery. Though happiness is our real nature, when our mind comes out, what it experiences is only misery. We may disagree with Bhagavan. Oh no, I'm quite happy. I'm enjoying my life. Everything is fine for me. I've got no problem. Suffering may come sometimes, but at the moment I'm not too worried about that. We may think we're happy, but from Bhagavan's perspective, the state we're in is a state of unhappiness, because we are comparing, when we talk about happiness and unhappiness, we are comparing two relatives. We're comparing our relative happiness that we experience sometimes, the pleasures of life, with the pains of life. And we say, oh, today I had a good day, today I had a bad day, this is a pleasant experience, that's an unpleasant experience. These are all just pairs of opposites. They're all very relative. We're not comparing with the supreme happiness, which is our real nature. Bhagavan says, from a perspective of our real nature, anything other than that is misery, because mind coming out is it covers the true happiness that we really are. It's thought that casts a veil over happiness. So though happiness is our real nature, the rising of thought, and the root of thought is the ego, the first thought, which Bhagavan says that is what the mind is in essence. That casts a veil over happiness. Why? Because our real nature, Bhagavan says in verse 27 of Upadesha Undiya, he says it's Anadi, Ananta, Akanda, Satchidananda. Anadi means beginningless. Ananta means endless, limitless, infinite. Akanda means unbroken, undivided. Satchidananda, Sat is what is, Chit is awareness, Ananda is happiness. These are not three different things, they're one and it's a compound to denote that they're all one and the same thing. So happiness is what is, it's the real nature of what is. But when we rise with this mind, we limit ourselves with this finite body, and we see things other than ourselves, and so we experience misery. Because we're the infinite whole, as soon as we limit ourselves and see things other than ourselves, we react to other things, either with likes or dislikes. Some things that seem to contribute to our happiness, we like. Other things that seem to contribute to pain or misery for us, we dislike. And all these problems come into existence. So the very rising of the mind is the root of the mind or ego, it's one and the same, but that is the root of all misery. And so all misery is experienced in the mind. One word about the term that is often used, but is generally used, if Bhagavan's using it here in this paragraph of Nāṉ Yār, for unhappiness or misery or suffering, is dukkham. Dukkham literally means we could translate it as discomfort or anything that is other than the perfect condition. It's dushka, it's very difficult to say. It's less than the perfect condition. Anything less than the perfect condition is misery. So in Buddhism, they often say life is misery, And because nowadays people don't like to talk about suffering and misery and everything, people say, they say, oh no, it doesn't really mean misery, it means dissatisfaction or whatever. That's generally what, I mean, it does mean dissatisfaction, but it also, it covers everything other than perfect happiness. Is sukha is happiness, anything other than sukha is dukkha. According to Bhagavan, this is all that we're experiencing now is unhappiness, is misery, compared to our real nature, which is perfect, infinite, unalloyed happiness. And Bhagavan says that happiness, he says, I just read that, Atma Sukham Andre Uludu. That the happiness that is our self, that alone exists. Aduve Satyam, that alone is real. So for Bhagavan, that is all that actually exists. Why then we experience misery? Because we've risen to this mind, because we've separated ourselves from our real nature, because we're not aware of ourselves as we really are. So the solution to all misery is simply to be aware of, is to know ourselves as we actually are, to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. Now we're aware of ourselves as I am this body. That, for Bhagavan says, that is misery. To be aware of ourselves as we are. I am I. I'm nothing other than I. We're nothing other than ourselves. And our self is pure, unalloyed, infinite, eternal happiness. So even now we're perfectly happy. We're just not aware of that fact because we mistake ourselves to be with this body. And as soon as we mistake ourselves to be with this body, we see other things. So that is how I took this topic to mean, the place of suffering. The place of suffering is only the mind. The other meaning, which was the intended meaning apparently, is the role of suffering. What place suffering has in our life as spiritual aspirants. It is sometimes said suffering is good. Suffering is it is necessary in order to progress in the spiritual path. That is true in a certain sense, because if we're perfectly, we're never perfectly contented, but if life was always rosy, relatively speaking, we would have less motivation to seek anything beyond that. But we know life isn't always rosy. Sometimes life seems fine, things are going fine, we've got a good job, we've got nice husband, wife, children, parents, everything seems to be nice and rosy, sometimes. But it's not always like that. Disease comes, death comes, we lose our job, money comes, money goes, family comes, family goes, people who were once our friends turn against us, all sorts of things happen. We know nothing in this, the only constancy in this life is inconstancy. Nothing lasts. The good things come and they go. The bad things come and they go. So in that sense, suffering, because to the extent we suffer, to that extent we're looking for something beyond all this. But merely suffering in itself is not sufficient, because so many people are suffering in so many ways, but they don't all turn to the spiritual path. If people are suffering, for example, for want of money, they think if they can get money by some means or other, they'll be happy. If they're lonely, they think if they can get friends, if they can have family, they'll be happy. We're always looking for the happiness outside ourselves. So long as we're looking for the happiness outside ourselves, merely suffering isn't going to turn our mind within. We need, as Bhagavan said, we think we get happiness from the things of the world because of our viveka. So what we need is viveka. Viveka means proper judgment, proper discrimination. We need to see through all these appearances. It appears that we get happiness When we eat, if we like chocolate, when we eat chocolate, it appears that we get happiness. But where is that happiness coming from? In Guru Vachaka Kubai, Bhagavan gave a very nice analogy. He said, a very hungry dog once went to a cremation ground, and it found an old dry bone, and it started chewing on the bone. And because it was a very old dry bone, it started splintering, and it caused all cuts and wounds in the dog's mouth. So the dog, after chewing it for some time, it dropped and it saw blood on the bone, and it thought, this is the nice juicy marrow inside the bone. It thought, there's nothing in like this bone, and it went on happily chewing it and making more and more wounds in its mouth. So also is our seeking happiness outside ourselves. Just like the blood that the dog was licking off the bone was its own blood, the happiness that we think we're deriving from the things of this world is our own happiness, it's our own real nature. So long as we seek it outside, like the dog also suffers because he gets so many wounds in its mouth. We are suffering. The price to be paid for the pleasures we get from the world are the pains we get from the world. So we're looking in the wrong direction. So sometimes suffering can help us to develop that viveka, and as a result of a viveka, vairagya, freedom from desire to experience all these things. But so many types of ways in which we can experience pleasure in this world. We can become rich, we can become famous, we can get political power, we can do this, we can do that, all sorts of ways. But is it really worth trying for all these things? Slowly, after some time, we lose interest in all these things because we know these are all empty. Whatever happiness we get from these things, it's fleeting, it doesn't last, and it's not really substantial even while we have it. So we slowly, the maturity comes. In the scheme of things, happiness, the mixture of happiness and misery, it all has a part to play in that development of that viveka and consequent vairagya. Viveka means judgment, discrimination. Vairagya means freedom from desire. So it all has its part to play. But some people, in certain religions, they think that if you do severe penance, that is bodily mortification or whatever, that is the way to reach God. But if you suffer a lot, and you can come close to God by suffering, we shouldn't. That is actually going in the wrong direction, because what is the nature of God? God is perfect happiness. So how by suffering we come close to God? We're removing ourselves further away from God by causing by unnecessarily mortifying ourselves or causing suffering to ourselves. So that is not the way. The proper way is, let whatever happens, happens. It all is happening according to the will of God. We have that attitude of surrender. Nothing happens except by the will of Bhagavan. Okay, it's all the fruits of our past karmas that we're experiencing now. But who selects which fruits we're to experience when? That is Bhagavan, that is God or Guru or whatever we call it. But it's that higher power. So whatever is happening according to Bhagavan's will or God's will, however we choose to say it. So if pleasures come, okay, that's Bhagavan's will. If misery comes, that's Bhagavan's will. We learn to develop an equipoise. We're not, when pleasant things happen, we're not too carried away by them. When unpleasant things happen, we're not too dejected by them. We know this is life. Life is pleasure, pain, it comes and it goes. We learn indifference. That is vairagya. So in that sense, we're not going out to seek suffering or misery or anything, but when it comes, we accept it as that is part of life. That is all given by Bhagavan for our own good. Why Bhagavan gives us all these experiences, the good and the bad? His ultimate aim is to turn our mind within, because he knows happiness is not in any of these external things. Happiness lies within us. So the only way to attain happiness is to turn the mind within, to know what we really are. So ultimately the aim of all these things is to turn our mind within. So suffering is a part of life. We all know that, but it's not a. It's to be welcomed in the same way that we welcome whatever happens, because it's all the will of God. But why God gives all these experiences, we should always bear that in mind. It's to turn our mind within. We're not going to. Nothing permanent can be found outside ourselves. What is permanent, what is enduring, is only ourselves. It can only be found within ourselves. So this is what's the difference between a worldly life and a spiritual life? Worldly life, the mind is going outwards towards the world. Spiritual life, the mind is at least trying to turn within. So that is our aim, trying to turn within to know what we really are. That is what spirituality is all about. And when we turn within, we're going beyond this pair of opposites, this pleasure and pain, happiness and misery, because it's only when the mind turns outwards that all these, this is what Bhagavan calls dyads, these pairs of opposites, they appear only when the mind goes outwards. When the mind turns within, what is there is only one. So there's no room for any opposites. In sleep, we don't experience any misery, because what we experience in sleep is only ourselves, nothing other than ourselves. There's only perfect, sleep is a state of perfect oneness. There's no multiplicity, no phenomena, no subject-object. There's just pure awareness. That is our real nature, and that is true happiness. So, if we were content with sleep, if we were truly content with sleep, we would never rise in this waking and dream state. It's because we don't yet have the clear discrimination to understand what our real nature is, but we're discontented, and so we keep on rising again and again, seeking things outside ourselves. If by persistent practice of turning our mind back within, we'll get more and more inner clarity, and the more inner clarity we get, the clearer it will become to us. But there's no happiness, or there's nothing to be gained from the external world. Only what is to be gained is all within us. And it's not to be gained, actually, because it's already there. All we need to do is to lose the desire to go outwards. That desire to go outwards is the very nature of the ego. And who has desire to go outwards? It's only the ego. So we have to get rid of this ego. That is the ultimate aim. This ego is suffering, and our aim is to get rid of it. So the role of suffering, the purpose of suffering, is to get rid of it and to be happy.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Start off. You more or less said this, but suffering is probably the most powerful agency, or whatever mechanism that God uses, that the self uses to sort of bring us back into ourself, or Brahman. But the self uses a variety of mechanisms, and one of them is joy and pleasure, as you said, and they're equally important in their own way.
Well, neither are important, actually, because it's only when the mind goes out that we see this duality, this pair of opposites, this happiness and misery. Why should we allow the mind to go out in the first place? What we need is that discrimination to understand. Our aim is neither the pleasures of the world nor the pains of the world. Our aim is to know what we ourselves really are. And when we know what we ourselves really are, in sleep, what are we aware of other than ourselves? We're aware of nothing other than ourselves, and we're perfectly happy. So we need to be content with just being aware of ourselves and nothing else.
That's a very complete answer. Nothing else to say.
Yes, God does use, I mean, he does give us pleasant experiences, unpleasant experiences. It's all for a purpose. But ultimately his purpose is for us to turn our mind within.
Yes, I agree. But, I mean, he uses these different devices, if you like, whatever you call them,
yeah,
in different ways. And the purpose is to make one,
yes,
keep one in. I mean, that's
yes,
the whole object.
Yes, yes, but we have to keep that object in mind. The object is not either pleasure or pain. Mm. The object is investigating what is this ego. Who am I who experiences pleasure? Who am I who experiences pain?
Absolutely.
What exactly is the mind?
Hmm?
I mean, what is the mind? Is it an attribute?
Very good question. One mind can't tell the other mind. We each have to investigate ourselves to see what is this mind. If you ask Bhagavan what is the mind, he'll say, first look and see whether there's a mind there. Okay, he analyzes the mind. He said what the mind is nothing but thoughts. Of all the thoughts, the first thought is the thought called I. That is the ego. So what the mind essentially is this ego. But all the other thoughts come and go. I mean, no other thought can exist without the ego being there. So if the ego rises, it projects other thoughts. So what the mind essentially is the ego. But this ego is not permanent. There's no ego in sleep. Because there's no ego in sleep, there are no other thoughts, and there's no world, there's nothing. No pain or pleasure or anything in sleep. There's a pure Satchidananda. So, but to find out, so when the question, what is the mind, it can be answered only by answering the question, what is this ego? If we ask Bhagavan, what is this ego, he'll tell you, first look and see if there is an ego. If you can find an ego and bring it to me, I'll tell you what it is. We can't find it. If we look within, Tedinalotam pidikam. If thought, it takes flight, Bhagavan says. So it seems, the ego seems to exist so long as we're looking outwards. If we turn back within, there's no such thing. And when the ego goes, everything else goes with it. Because who is experiencing pleasure? Who is experiencing pain? It's the ego. It's us as the ego. Who is experiencing all this world? Us as this ego. That's why Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Ulinaptu, Ahandayundayan anatamundahum. If the ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. Ahandayindrel indruanatam. If the ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ahandaya yavamam. The ego itself is everything. Therefore, investigating what it is giving up everything.
So would it be accurate to say that the mind is like a sort of a pseudo structure that's basically constructed out of thoughts that are chosen by whatever desires or aversions that you have against those thoughts?
Well, it's not the thoughts that create the mind, it's the mind that creates the thoughts. The mind in the sense of, there are two senses in which we use the term mind. Sometimes we use the term mind as a collective term for all thoughts. Sometimes we use the mind for that which thinks all those thoughts. That which thinks all those thoughts is the ego. That is the first thought. So it's the ego that constructs that projects all the other thoughts. So the ego, Bhagavan is constant in I mean, one thing he persists in pointing out, The whole problem is this ego. Because we have risen as this ego, all these problems arise. And how we rise as this ego? We rise as this ego by grasping form. That is, by taking a body as ourself. Where was this body before we rose as an ego? In dream we take a body to be I, don't we? Do we have to go to some other place to find a body to take as I in dream? The ego itself projects the body and the whole world, and it experiences that. Bhagavan says this is just another dream. The body we now take as ourself is our own projection. The world from which we are seeking pleasure and in which we are trying to avoid pain is nothing but our own projection.
So what determines the type of force that one experiences? So if they're coming out of the mind,
okay, all types of thoughts come. It is vasanas. What are vasanas? Vasanas are our own likes and dislikes. We have cultivated through so many lives, we've cultivated different likes and dislikes. We've sought pleasure in different ways. Some of us seek pleasure in watching football, some people seek pleasure in watching films, some people seek pleasure in amassing wealth, some people seek pleasure in intellectual pursuits, all types of things. We each have our own particular likes and dislikes. There's certain things we like, certain things give us pleasure, and certain things we find unpleasant. For one person, sitting watching a football match they're in heaven when they're watching a football match. Nothing better. But if you're not interested in football, it's boring. You'll just be thinking of something else and wondering why all these people are shouting about. So it's our own likes and dislikes. And it's those likes and dislikes in their seed form are vasanas. And that is what determines which thoughts we think. Basically, we think about what interests us, don't we?
But the thoughts are independent of... We're sort of choosing the thoughts as they come. Sort of like very...
Ultimately, yes, but it's our own. The thoughts are an expansion of our own vasanas. So we are the ones who choose thoughts. Okay, sometimes unpleasant thoughts come, but that is because why unpleasant thoughts come? Because we may fear something, and so the thought of that thing keeps on coming to us because we're afraid of it. So not all thoughts, though we choose the thoughts to think. The thoughts we think are not always pleasant thoughts. Because as this ego we are deluded. This world seems to be real. For example, when we're dreaming, it's all our own mental projection. Everything that we experience. But we experience pleasant things in dream and we experience unpleasant things. And while dreaming, we can't just, if we're being chased by a monster, say, we can't just will that monster to disappear. If we're caught in a flood, we can't will that flood to stop. It's because, why that is, though we are the creator of the dream, we create the dream and we create ourselves as a character in that dream. That is, we not only project the whole dream world, we project a certain person in that dream, a certain body, which we take to be ourselves. So in dream, we don't experience ourselves as the creator, we experience ourselves as a creature. We are the creator, but we create it by becoming part of it. That's why all this is created only by you. But how do you experience yourself? Do you experience yourself as the creator of this? How you experience yourself now is a little person in this vast universe, occupying a small place in space, a small place in time. So how can you control all this when you're this small creature? But actually it's all your creation. This is Maya. So also our thoughts, it's we who are projecting the thoughts, but sometimes we feel we are overwhelmed by thoughts. People get terrible depressions. What is depression? It's nothing but thoughts. Some people have a manic depressive. Sometimes they're they feel very, very happy. Everything seems rosy in life. Sometimes they're very, very depressed. This is all thoughts. They themselves are projecting all these thoughts, but they are a victim of their own thoughts. Just like if we're caught in a war, say, the whole war is our own mental projection. But we're suffering as a result of it. We feel we can't stop the war, can we? Because we have projected this world and projected ourselves as a character in this world.
Character can't do anything. So ultimately what makes the character turn back inwards? There must be this desire still in the inner core.
Well, ultimately, what are we all seeking? What is every living being seeking? From the smallest ant to the gods in heaven or wherever. Everyone is seeking happiness. Why are we all seeking happiness? Because happiness is our real nature. But we seek happiness in different places because of our lack of discrimination. We think if we get the things we want, we'll be happy. If things happen that we don't want, we'll be miserable. We think that. So we're constantly trying to acquire things that we think will make us happy and to avoid things that we think will make us unhappy. This very effort to do this is the things that we are trying to avoid will cause us misery if they come because we dislike them. So the whole mess is created by us. If we would be indifferent to whatever happens, let disease come, let war come, let pleasures come, it doesn't matter to me. If we were really indifferent to it all, nothing would cause us pleasure, nothing would cause us pain. But we have those likes and dislikes. So, but we are all seeking happiness. That's a point. Through so many Janmas means births, lives. But every life is nothing but a dream, according to Bhagavan. So through so many dreams, we experience so many things. In the past, we dreamt that we were emperors, we dreamt that we were paupers, we were slaves, we were this, we were that. We've gone through so many things. We dreamt that we were animals, we dreamt that we were gods in heaven or whatever. According to our karmas, we have different types of dreams. We've been through all this. But in all these conditions, we're seeking happiness, constantly seeking happiness. Slowly, discrimination dawns. We understand, however much money I have, that's not going to make me happy. However pleasant conditions I'm in, it's all transitory, it's all fleeting. Slowly we come to understand these things, and we begin to look to want something beyond all these worldly pleasures. Then people usually turn to God. We think there's some higher power behind all these things, and we think if we pray to that higher power and have bhakti for that God, we personalize God. We take God to be another person like us. So we give him a name and form. We call him Shiva, Vishnu, Rama, Krishna, Jesus, Buddha, whatever. We give some name, or we take God to be another person like us, and we've developed love for God. But whatever name and form we give to God, what God represents is that which is beyond this material world. So when we're seeking God, we're seeking something, and I'm not saying many people pray to God. Most people who pray to God, they're not praying to God for God's sake. They're praying to God for their own sake. They pray to God, give me health, give me wealth, give me this, give me that. This is not love of God. But after going through all that, after taking God as a means to an end, finally eventually we come to a point where we understand, if God is giving me all the things I want, which is greater? Sadhguru has written a beautiful song. Kodu tabam perida, inda kodu porul perida. That means, which is greater, the giver or the things that are given? If someone is always giving you what you want, is not that person greater than the things they're giving you? So we slowly, our love for worldly things blossoms into a love for God. We want God for God's sake, not for the sake of anything we can get from God. We want to give ourselves wholly to God. So bhakti develops. But eventually, God is not, we take God to be something outside ourselves, and so we're seeking Him. So eventually God has to appear in the form of Guru to tell you what you're seeking is inside you. You are that. God is your real nature. If you want to know God, you have to know what you yourself are. And so our minds are turned within. But then once we understand that's our aim, to turn our mind within, then another big problem starts. Because through so many jemmas, so many dreams, we have been cultivating this habit of going outwards. Even our worshipping God, our love for God, we're taking God to be something other than ourselves. Now we've got to change the direction of our mind. Instead of allowing our mind to go outward, we've got to turn it back within. Because of the strength of the habits, the vasanas that lead us to go outwards, it's quite a struggle. It's quite a struggle. But once we've started on this path, if we persevere, we will surely succeed. Because how all these vasanas have come into existence? Who has cultivated all these vasanas? We have cultivated them. There are likes and dislikes. So we can change our likes and dislikes. We can give up feeding those vasanas, give up seeking those things outside ourselves, begin seeking things within. Then slowly our Vishaya vasanas get weaker, and our Sat vasana, the love just to be as we really are, that is strengthened. So it's a long process, but one day we will come to the end of this process. One day we will turn within 100%, we'll see what we really are, and then we'll know the process never happened at all, because there was never any ego undergoing all this.
Sorry, I've got taken all your time. Just one last question. Does it happen all of a sudden in one go, the knowing of your nature, or is it more
Sadhguru gives a very nice analogy. He says, you know, old-fashioned cannon, if you want to blast an old-fashioned cannon, first you have to ram in the gunpowder and then some wick and something, and finally the cannonball. It takes time to prepare it. But when you light the fuse and it explodes and the cannonball comes out, that happens in a split second. So all our sadhana, through so many lives, is the preparation. All our struggling to turn within and our mind again coming out, that's all the preparation. But the final blast happens in a split second. We can't, some people say, oh, he's almost realized, or he's partially realized. That has no meaning. Either we know what we are, or we don't know what we are. Either we experience ourselves as this ego, or we experience ourselves as we really are. There's no halfway between the two. So now, so long as we are aware of ourselves as anything other than what we actually are, that is ego. When we are aware of ourselves as we actually are, ego is just instantly destroyed. So ultimately, it all happens in a flash. But when that flash happens, we then find nothing has happened at all. Because what remains is what was always there. That's why Bhagavan said, there's nothing actually for us to gain. We are seeking something, we want to gain something. Everyone wants to gain something. But actually it's not a matter of gaining anything, because what we are seeking is already here. It's already ours. We are already that. All it is not gaining anything, it's losing everything. And what is the root of everything? The ego. So lose the ego, you lose everything, and that is, in effect, gaining everything. Once you gain it, you find, I'd never lost it in the first place, so nothing has ever happened. That's why the final truth is ajata. Nothing has ever happened. There never was any rising of the ego, there never was anyone doing any sadhana, there never was a desire for moksha, because there never was any bondage. There was never anyone bound.
Perhaps another way of looking at it is that to ask the question as to who is suffering.
Exactly. Yes.
Who is the person who suffers?
That is what.
Person doesn't exist. That person doesn't exist because I is a figment of imagination.
Of whose imagination? The same ego. But we say that we say the ego doesn't exist.
Yes.
But that is the truth. That is the ultimate truth. But it seems to us we seem to be this ego. So that is why this investigation is necessary. We need to investigate this ego. So long as the snake doesn't actually exist, it's only a rope. But until we look at it closely enough, it seems to be a snake. So the snake seems to be very real because of ātma-vichara, lack of investigation. If we look very closely at the snake, we'll see there's no snake at all, there's only a rope. So this ego doesn't actually exist, but in order for that to be our experience, we need to look at it very closely to see what it actually is. It means ourself. Now, what is this ego? I am this ego. I mean, the ego means I. It is what I take what I seem to be now, that is ego.
I consider myself to be my body, my mind, my intellect.
But who is the one who considers that? That is the ego. That ego, when it turns its attention back on itself, it disappears. So, as you say, the crucial question is, to whom is all this? Who is suffering? Who is experiencing all this? To whom does all this appear real? So that Bhagavan has given us such a simple remedy, but such a powerful remedy. This simple question, who am I? In its various forms, we can ask it in the form of to whom is suffering, who is suffering, or we can ask it in so many ways. All it boils down to ultimately is, who am I? This is such a powerful weapon. This is the supreme Brahmastra. Because by this Brahmastra we'll be able to destroy this vast universe and all universes that have ever existed. Because the root of all these things is this ego. So this simple question, who am I, if applied properly as an investigation, this is far more powerful than even the most powerful nitrogen bombs. It's more powerful than the original Big Bang from which this universe is supposed to have been created.
Ego is the same as I thought. There's no difference.
No, but no difference. No difference. It's,
I thought.
Yeah, see, I thought. Yeah, yes.
Michael, can I interject again?
Yeah.
Take you up on something. We're talking about bangs and things, cannons.
Yeah.
Your Sadhuam's analogy of the cannon. I feel that realization, you can't just dismiss people's degree of realization. It may come in a flash, ultimately. But the trouble is, if you look at it like that, people are always sort of looking for the flash and waiting for this sort of point where they suddenly find themselves enlightened. I've got it. I think that may be slightly misleading.
Well, no, the misleading thing is the idea that I am going to get it.
Right.
The I that is seeking, it is going to be finished. It's going to be eradicated. It's going to be annihilated.
That is right,
So
sure.
it is what is. I mean, this term realization. Bhagavan actually used to joke about the term realization. He used to. The equivalent Sanskrit term is sakshatkara. Sakshatkara means making direct. Bhagavan said, but how can you make what is already direct? What is directly experienced by all of us, every one of us directly experiences I. How can you make that direct? So he used to point out that the term sakshatkara is not an appropriate term, is not the most appropriate term to use in this context. He used to say the same about the English term, realization. He used to say, what is real is always real. We cannot realize what is already real. You cannot make real what is already real. The problem is, we have realized what is unreal.
Yeah.
So we need to unrealize the unreal. Right. That's all that is required. So Bhagavan doesn't ask us to seek realization. He asks us to seek unrealization.
Okay, that's good. I much prefer Bhagavan's explanation to Sadhuam's, forgive me.
No, it's not at all.
It is different. I mean, the way that Bhagavan put it is much more, seems to me to make much more sense.
But it's just, what Sadhuam was saying was the reason Sadhuam gave that analogy is people often ask, is it going to happen slowly or will it happen suddenly? Then he gave this, but there's no degrees of Atma-vichara.
I don't accept that. I'm sorry.
How can there be degrees of? According to Bhagavan, Atma-vichara alone is real. That is, he's in verse 13 of Ulilanavi. He says, "Jnanamam tane me." Oneself, which is jnana, alone is real. So that is what is already here. But now, the ajnana, the ignorance, the ego, seems to be here. Either the ego is here or it's not here. You can't have a state of... and people who talk about degrees of realization or partial realization or steps on the path to realization, all these are for whom? It's for the ego. The ego is the problem.
Well, of course it is, because it's the ego that's trying to get rid of itself.
Yes, yeah, of course. So anything achieved by the ego is not the final thing. The final goal is the eradication of the ego.
Right.
You can't have the ego, can't have half ego here, half ego not here. Either we experience ourselves as this ego, or we experience ourselves as we really are.
Okay, I don't want to pursue this.
No, but we have to pursue it until we find out. But you can't be both. You can't experience yourself as you really are and experience yourself as the ego. It's one or the other.
Mary Ann's got something.
I'm not disagreeing with you at all, but I just think it's helpful to think of it in terms of the way the Buddhists explain it, in terms of relative truth or absolute truth, so that when Michael speaks, he's always speaking from the point of absolute truth. If you look at it from the point of what the Buddhists call relative truth, for example, they say that you need to have compassion for the suffering of other people and so on. That is talking from the point of view of relative truth.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to remember that, because you're always talking from the absolute.
Yeah. But we're aiming for the absolute, aren't we? Yeah. But I agree. What is, like you said, mention compassion. Compassion comes with what? With purity of mind. The mind, a very impure mind, will not be drawn to this path at all. A very impure mind will not feel compassion for others. It'll be totally selfish. But as we progress on this spiritual path, the mind is gradually purified. That's it. Its selfishness, its strong desires for me, I, me, and mine, gets weakened. Slowly, when seeing others suffer, it suffers to see others suffering. That is what compassion is. Compassion means suffering with. So all these, they come automatically as we're following this path. If we're truly following this path, we will automatically feel compassion. We will automatically feel pained when we see others suffering. So all this is part of the process. So, as you say, it's all relative. The purity of mind, whether the mind is very impure or relatively pure, it's all relative. But only when the mind reaches a certain degree of purity will it be possible to turn it 180 degrees within. Because it's the impurities of the mind. What are the impurities of the mind? The desires, basically. Essentially, all impurities boil down to desire. Whether we say it's anger, fear, jealousy, all these things, these are all impurities of the mind, but they all boil down to desire. And the root of all other impurities is desire, and the root of desire is the ego, the one who has desire. So the perfect purification can be achieved only when we get rid of the ego. So long as the ego is there, it will have desires to a greater or lesser extent. During the spiritual path, the desires of the ego are slowly weakened. And so it's easier, the more outward going desires are weakened, the easier it is for us to turn within. So I'm not disagreeing, but on the spiritual path, there is such a thing as progress. Though we cannot measure our progress, we cannot say how far away we are from that final moment when we surrender our ego entirely. It's all true on the relative plane. I don't deny that. But what I'm saying is, when all this is true, all relativity is true so long as the ego is there. But we're talking now about the annihilation of the ego. What is called rather inappropriately called realization is nothing but the annihilation of the ego. There's a process of purification which makes the ego ready to surrender itself, but the actual surrender of the ego is a split second. So there's no contradiction at all.
No, it's just that maybe some people who come here like to get obviously pointers of how to lead their lives on a practical level and everyday level.
Yeah.
And it can be quite easy to get into this intellectual thing of saying, making these kind of rather glib remarks about...
Well, yes, but we have to make connections. There are connections between all these things. Why Bhagavan stresses so much the annihilation of the ego? No, but I mean, many people come to Bhagavan, they don't really understand Bhagavan. Well, none of us really understand. If we really understood, the ego would be annihilated. But the whole process is, we read what Bhagavan has said, we try to put into practice what Bhagavan has said. As we go along this path, we get more and more clarity, his words become more and more meaningful. So it's very... If our mind is impure, we will definitely misinterpret Bhagavan's teachings or any spiritual teachings. That is how religions come. Great sages come and give very simple teachings like Bhagavan gave. People's minds are complicated. They complicate things, make a mess of things, and so we get so many religions in the world, and religions fight with each other, and all these problems come. The nature of a mind is to complicate things. What makes Bhagavan such a supreme spiritual master is the way in which his teachings simplify things, bring things down to the bare basics. That is very, very valuable, and that is not impractical. It's very, very practical.
When I say impractical,
I know what you mean. But if we understand the basic principles of Bhagavan's teachings, it helps us a lot to live in this world.
But we need to understand them not with the mind. That's the thing.
I know. People just repeat it, but that is not the point. When we say understand, it means more than just. There has to be an inner clarity. That inner clarity comes reading Bhagavan's teachings, thinking about them is an important part of it, but the most important part is putting them into practice. Because putting them into practice gives the mind the light to really understand it. So for
example, just to give you an example, if I'm walking down the street and you know, and I see somebody asking for money, and he's very poor, you know, I might feel sorry for him and give him some money.
Yeah.
But you know, maybe that's coming from a place of semi-ego or whatever.
Yeah.
Is that not just as good or better than saying to myself, well, I am the self, I am the self, I am the self, so I have nothing. Do you know what I mean?
To the extent we give up mine, suppose you have a very dense bush. You want to cut the root of that bush. But before you can cut up a root, you can't even access the root because it's got so many leaves, branches. You've first got to cut at least some of the lower branches and things before you can get up a root. So it's necessary to purify the mind. If we are so wrapped up in ourselves that we're not ready even to give money to a food to a starving person or something.
People might feel conflicted, you know, if they've got too many theories running in their head, that's enough.
Well, we need, that's why Bhagavan has given us very, very simple theories, and why we need clarity. People read, that's a problem with reading too much. People read so much. They read some Buddhist text, they read this, they read that, they read someone's interpretation of it, someone else's interpretation of it. It becomes a big confusion. That's why Bhagavan has simplified things so much. That's why I often emphasize the three most important texts to understand Bhagavan. The real core of Bhagavan's teachings are Nāṉ Yār, that's who am I, Upadeshundya, the 30 verses, and Uladunaptu, 40 verses on existence. These four texts, Bhagavan has given the basic principles of his teachings. If we read a book like Talks, there are many good things in Talks, but because Bhagavan is answering questions, people asking from so many perspectives, we can't really get the essence of Bhagavan's teachings. Often it's not very clear in Talks why Bhagavan answered like this, and sometimes the recording isn't also very clear. But if we take these three texts that I just mentioned, these have the very fundamental principles of Bhagavan's teaching. If we first grasp the fundamental principles, then we can apply it to everything else. But if we don't grasp the fundamental principles, we've read so many books and everything's a bit of a confusion. That's why this is a path of clarity. What we are seeking ultimately is the perfect clarity of self-awareness. Because clarity of self-awareness is what is called Atma-vichara or self-realization or whatever. The perfect clarity is what we're seeking. So we have to, first we have to be clear at a mental level. So we have to clear out unwanted beliefs. We have to simplify our understanding. That is the key to it. But if we've read too many things and we haven't used our viveka to sort out what are the most important points and what are the fundamental principles, if we don't grasp the fundamental principles, whatever we read is going to just add to our confusion. Many people have read Bhagavan's books, they're still confused because they're not grasping the fundamentals. In order to grasp the fundamentals, we need a certain inner clarity. That inner clarity we get only by putting what Bhagavan taught us into practice. Bhagavan himself once said to Lakshman Sharma, he said, according to the purity of the antakarana, antakarana means the inner organ, that means the manas, buddhi, chitta, mana, ahankaram, these four. But Bhagavan has said actually these four, they're just four different functions of the same thing. They're all the same. So according to the purity of the mind is what it means essentially. According to the purity of the mind, the same teaching reflects in different ways. So we have to, how we purify our mind? By putting what Bhagavan taught us into practice. The more we put it into practice, the more inner clarity we get, the more discrimination we get, the clearer, the more we'll be able to recognize the key principles of Bhagavan's teaching, and we'll be able to apply those principles to whatever else we read and also in our day-to-day life. But sadhana is not just for 20 minutes meditation morning and evening. It's every moment we have to be keeping a watchful eye on this ego. Because the ego is rising in so many ways. and tricking us in so many ways. That constant self-vigilance, self-attentiveness has to be there. That is where we get the clarity. Because ultimately the light is from where? The light is within. So the more we look within, the more clarity we get. So it's all very, very simple, but unnecessarily complicated by our mind. So we've got, it's not a, Bhagavan's teaching, there's not a huge amount of theories or anything. In fact, the very opposite of, Bhagavan's theories are very, very, very simple. But we have to simplify our own understanding in order to grasp them. And we have to be willing to simplify, which means we have to be ready to let go of so many of our old beliefs and preconceptions. Many of us aren't ready to let go. We want to hold on to the old beliefs. Bhagavan once said, here it's not a matter of learning, it's a matter of unlearning. That's a very simple thing he said, but it has a very, very deep meaning. We come to Bhagavan with so many ideas, so many beliefs. Bhagavan begins chipping away at all our beliefs. What is our most fundamental belief? I am this body. All our other beliefs are based on this. Because I believe I am this body, believe means I'm not just saying in a superficial sense believe, it's my actual experience that I am this body. Because I experience this body as myself, and because I am real, then I experience this body as real. And because this body is real, the whole world seems to be real. So Bhagavan is going to a very root, and he's questioning even our most fundamental beliefs, our most fundamental experiences. Bhagavan is questioning. So he is deconstructing everything that we have built up. He's deconstructing our understanding, simplifying it down to the simplest, as simple can be.
I think from the widest perspective, we could say that the life we're given has been preordained for our spiritual development.
Yes.
And in the preordination of this,
yes,
there contains the right amount of suffering and the right amount of pleasure.
Yeah, that's all true. But the life has been preordained for our spiritual development. But our spiritual development is in our hands ultimately. It's from moment to moment we have a choice. Whether we allow our mind to go out and to get swept away by our vasanas, or whether we turn it within. This choice we have at every moment of our life. Most of the time we're allowing our mind to be drawn outwards. But slowly, sanne, Krishna says in Gita, gradually, gently, we have to cultivate this habit of turning within. So our bondage is in our hands and our salvation is in our hands.
Acceptance rather than resistance.
Yes.
It's one of these sort of... I'm sorry, did you want to say something?
Yeah, no, you can.
I'll try to be quick. It's one of these sort of concentric things where two things are right. There is both no free will in the sense that it's one of these situations where two truths are right. In one sense, there is no free will because everything's destined. On the other hand, we have got.
What is destined is what we are to experience in this life. Free will, we have our freedom. We have freedom to want. What is free will means what we want. We have freedom to want, and we have freedom to try. So that freedom we have. We don't have freedom to change any of the external experiences.
But you see, that freedom is preordained. I mean, the choices that we make are preordained.
No, they're not. They're not. Certain things, certain actions are necessary in order to experience our destiny. If it is my destiny to be hit by a car while crossing the road, I will make a foolish decision and try to run across the road quickly in front of a car and be hit by it. That foolish decision I made was made according to destiny. Because it was my destiny to be hit by that car at that moment, that is what is called in Sanskrit, buddhi karma nisarini, the mind going after the karma.
Yeah, well, you proved the point.
Yeah, but,
I mean, that's precisely what I meant.
But we can't say everything that we decide is according to destiny, because the two things are happening. Our destiny is driving our mind, and our free will is driving our mind. Two forces are working there together.
Yeah, okay, well, that's what I meant.
Bhagavan never gave room for this dispute about which prevails, fate or free will. Yeah. Bhagavan says this dispute about fate and free will occurs only for those who don't have discrimination of the root of fate and free will, the ego. Oh. So long as the ego is there, there is both fate and free will. Yeah. Right. It's the free will, it's by the free will that we do agamya, which the fruit of which is stored in sanchita, which are selected as prarabdha. If there was no free will, the whole karma theory would fall apart. With no free will, then there's no agamya.
No, that's dead right.
Our what we're destined to experience now can't be the fruit of what we were destined to experience before. It would be meaningless. We do have freedom. We do have freedom. But the freedom is within certain constraints. But essentially, when we say free will, people think free will means you can do whatever you want. It doesn't mean that. It means you can want whatever you want. We choose what we want. Okay, our vasanas are there, but the vasanas are the result of what we have wanted in the past. So we can change, we can weaken our vasana, the undesirable vasanas. We can use our discrimination. We can not allow our mind to go after the undesirable vasanas, and we can encourage it to go after the desirable vasanas. So we have freedom within certain constraints. So there's no contradiction between fate and free will. Okay. Both are there for the ego.
Yes, that's another bit. Yes.
Yeah.
When we do the inquiry,
yes.
There is an action. So how this is a contradiction
there is no
with doing things.
Okay, there is an action in the sense. Arising is an action, is a subsiding an action. If a storm starts, the storm arises. That's a great activity when there's a storm. When the storm becomes calm, do you call that an activity? It's going from intense activity down to no activity. What vichara is not an activity, but a subsidence of activity. What is activity? When our attention moves away from ourselves towards other things, that is activity. When our attention turns back to ourselves, it's not actually moving anywhere, it's staying in its source. So vichara is not an action, it's a non-action. We could say the turning of our attention back towards ourselves is an action, but it's not actually, because that turning of our attention is simply withdrawing our attention from other things and letting it rest in its source, which is ourself.
Is it that sometimes it feels like a struggle?
It feels like a struggle. Why it feels like a struggle? It's not a struggle to be self-attentive. The struggle is because we have a strong desire to attend to other things. So we are struggling with our own desires. Our desires, our vasanas are drawing us outwards. We are trying to turn within. So it's not just sometimes. The whole of spiritual sadhana it's a constant battle. It's a constant battle because our nature is to be aware of ourself alone and to be perfectly happy. But the nature of the ego is to be going outwards. So we are trying to turn this outward going ego back within. That is a struggle. Definitely it's a struggle. But the struggle is not a struggle to do anything. The struggle is the struggle just to be. Because self-awareness is our real nature. So being attentively self-aware is not doing something, it's just being as we are. But because we have this strong urge to go outwards, it's a struggle. It's a struggle. There's no one who hasn't experienced that struggle.
about action without expecting also.
Yes. Yes.
It's a very, very difficult.
Well, Bhagavan has also said the Atma-gnani alone can be a perfect karma yogi. Nobody can can perfectly do action without expectation. So, but to a certain extent, by reducing the desire with which we do actions, we can purify our mind. But action is useful only for purifying the mind to a limited extent. For the complete purification of the mind, vichara is the way. Because what is the root of all impurities in the mind? The ego. And vichara alone can deal with the ego. Because what is the ego? The ego is a false self-awareness. An awareness of ourselves as something other than what we actually are. So the only solution to the wrong self-awareness is the correct self-awareness. So it's only by being aware of ourselves as we actually are that we can eradicate the ego. So it's only by turning within to look at ourselves. The ego has to turn back to look at itself, and thereby it will dissolve.
For example, practically when I do something and I see the desire of succeed, or does it help to be aware of this?
Yes, I mean it helps to be aware of how our mind deceives us. But we have to remember our real aim is to be turning this mind within. That is the real aim.
So when you see this desire, you ask it.
Yeah, yeah. To whom is this desire?
Thank you.
But actually, can we not go on to something else? Can we look at the ego? Can we find out what is the ego? Can we start with the newborn child? It's no ego. The first thought is I am. Is that right?
The thought I am is the ego.
So that's, but when the child is born, there is no I am.
How do you know that?
Because when a child speaks about themselves, they refer to themselves as Sheila.
Yes, okay, but that is because they're learning language. But I is more than just a word. I is a word that denotes our self-awareness.
But she doesn't have an identity. They haven't identified yet.
They have begun to identify. That is the thing. Is when we are aware of anything other than ourselves, that which is aware is the ego. But pure awareness is aware only of itself, not of anything. The awareness that is aware of things, of anything, is the ego. So so long as there is awareness of anything, that is the ego. So when in the very early stages of the bodily life, the ego is there, but it's identifying itself with the body, but it's a very vague, the state of a newborn baby is very like, in certain dreams, everything is fuzzy, when nothing is clear. Certain dreams are much clearer. So at the beginning of, after birth, that is like the beginning of a dream where it's all fuzzy. And slowly, slowly, as time goes on, it becomes more and more clear. But even a child's vision is not clear at first. It sees fuzzy shapes. Then slowly, as the physical organism develops, the mind's attachment to that physical organism also gets strengthened, and then we, yeah.
And the vasanas kick
Yeah,
in,
yeah.
and some vasanas are lost,
Yeah.
others are gained,
Yeah.
etc. And so on it develops.
Yeah. Once when someone's, some people were admiring some small babies, or a small baby in Bhagavan's presence. Bhagavan says, babies, he said something to the effect, babies, why we find babies so attractive? Because they haven't yet sprouted their horns. They haven't yet sprouted their horns. What he means is, the vasanas are there, but they haven't yet manifested. But very, very early on in life, if you see, for instance, 2-year-olds together, there's already, the personalities are very, very clear. So some are more dominant, some are more shy, so all the personal traits, it's just that in infancy, then they haven't begun to manifest, but they're all there in seed form.
Okay, so now we've got a form with an identity, I am,
Yes,
plus vasanas,
yes,
etc.
yes.
And now suddenly, they, well, not suddenly, but they realize I want to fulfill my purpose.
Yeah.
And I've got to see myself. Who is looking at what?
What is looking is always the ego. What is looking at anything other than itself is the ego. What is aware of anything other than itself is the ego.
So the ego is looking at the ego.
Well, it's looking at its own projection. In a sense, everything is the ego. Bhagavan has said, everything is the ego.
It's killing the ego.
Sorry?
The ego is trying to, it wants to destroy
Yes.
the ego.
Yes, exactly.
Really?
Because the ego is not what we really are. The ego, we have now understood, the ego is a false identity. It's a mistaken self-awareness. Now I am aware of myself as I am this body. That which is aware of myself as I am this body, that is the ego. That is not present in sleep. As soon as that ego rises, whether in waking or in dream, it projects the body, experiences that body as I, and through the sense of that body it projects the world. The pure self-awareness, what we really are, is not aware of anything other than itself. It's not aware of names, forms, or anything. It's not aware of phenomena. Bhagavan, in verse 4 of Ulilanapu, Bhagavan says, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. That is, when we experience ourselves as a body, we see, it's only when we experience ourselves as the form of this body, we experience all other forms. In dream, we experience ourselves as some other, the form of some other body, we experience forms. When we don't experience ourselves as a form, as in sleep, we don't experience any forms. Then in the next sentence of that same verse, Bhagavan says, if oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how? What he implies is only when we identify ourselves with a form, that is only when we project a body and take that body as ourself, we then see other forms. Our real nature is a state of formless, pure awareness, in which no forms appear at all.
Right. Right. So what we are trying to, so our real nature is trying to not identify, but see
our real nature is not trying anything. Our real nature is just, the nature of our real nature is just pure being, not doing.
Not involved.
Our real nature, not directly. How our real nature is involved is, our real nature is to love ourselves. Because love is always for happiness, and since our real nature is perfect happiness, infinite happiness, we have infinite love for ourselves. That's our real nature. When we experience ourselves limited as this body, our love is now for this body. How much we cherish this body, because we experience it as I. So throughout the life of this body, we are cherishing it. We give it food, we give it clothing, we protect it, we take medicines, we do all sorts of things for the comfort of this body, because we experience this body as I. So the love we have for this body is a distorted form of self-awareness. And because we have limited ourselves with this body, we see things other than ourselves. All these things other than ourselves, and the substance of all these things is only ourselves, because there's nothing other than ourselves. So, but some of the things other than ourselves, we find contribute to our happiness, our pleasure. Some things contribute to our pain. So we develop likes and dislikes. This likes and dislikes is all a reflection of our original self-love, which is our real nature. The same self-love, because we, in our real nature, is to love ourselves as we are, so we have the will of God is the will for us to be as we are, because God is nothing but our real self. So,
when you talk about the will of God, you're talking about the natural state of being.
Yes, I'm talking about natural state of being. What God loves. What does God love? God loves only himself, because he alone exists. That God who alone exists is what is our real nature. So our real nature loves itself, and it loves just to be itself. So that love that our real nature has for itself is what manifests in this state as grace. That grace is what molds our destiny, chooses the fruits of our past without doing anything. By its mere presence, it allots the correct fruit of our karmas in order to draw us back to itself. It manifests as a guru to tell us, turn within. Bhagavan, what is Bhagavan? Bhagavan is our own self, and our own self is infinite love. So what has manifested as Bhagavan to give us all these teachings is the love that we have for ourselves. But we, as we really are, have for ourselves as we really are.
My dilemma
Yes.
is who is looking at who?
You alone exist.
Yes.
So long as you are aware of yourself as anything finite, you're then aware of things other than yourself. So that the you who are aware of yourself as finite, that is the ego. That is not your real nature. So the rising of the ego is what obscures our real nature. In whose view does it obscure our real nature? Our real nature is always aware of itself as it is. In its view, nothing is ever obscured. It's only in the view of the ego that its real nature is obscured. So the ego rises and obscures its own nature, and then it sees all these things. And now it's in a bit of a pickle. It's all these problems are there. With the ego, when the ego rises, everything rises. All the problems of the world arise. Now, we have been trying to solve our problems by looking for happiness outside. We've been trying in so many ways. We've now reached a point, but we understand our problems are not going to be solved outside. The world is never going to be, we're never going to make the world a perfect place. There's never going to be justice. There's never going to be freedom from disease, death, and all these things. The world is a place of inevitable suffering. There may be pleasures there, but those pleasures are mixed up with suffering. So we are now looking for some solution beyond the material world, beyond the material pleasures. So we first, when we start to look for something beyond the material, we first have a conception of God. We think God is somewhere out there, far away, and we have to try and attain God. But that God is nothing but our own self. So that when we are ready for it, that God appears in a human form as Guru, as Bhagavan, to tell us, the God you are seeking is within you. The happiness you are seeking within you. The knowledge you are seeking is within you. Everything you are seeking is within you. You are that. That doesn't mean the ego is that. The ego is a limit. The essence of the ego is that, but the ego is not. But that is not the ego. Let's put it that way. The ego is that, but that is not the ego. If you understand what I mean, that is the ego. It's just like the snake is a rope, but the rope is not a snake. So the ego is not what we actually are. So, but now we experience ourselves as this ego. So as this ego, we now have to turn our attention back to ourselves to see what we really are. When we see what we really are, we will no longer experience ourselves as the ego. The ego will automatically be dissolved. It is so, what Bhagavan has taught us is so, so simple.
But can I just ask this one more question?
Yes?
It's not necessary to have a Bhagavan, is it?
Hmm?
You don't need a physical guru necessarily.
But the thing is, someone, because the nature of our mind is to go outwards, unless we've already in previous lives, we've already been through this process, it doesn't immediately strike us, but the answer's within. And even when we're told that the answer is within, even when we're told that everything we're seeking is within us, it's still very difficult for us because of the strong outward going. That is why a guru is necessary outside to say, turn within. The sole purpose of an external guru, a guru in human form, is to say, turn within. That is the essence of Bhagavan's teachings.
Oh God, so really, it's all one. But
it's all you.
It's all one, but there are elements that are false that you have got to recognize.
Well, you have to recognize the falsity of them, and then you have to see through them. So long as you don't see the rope, you see the snake. If someone tells you the snake is false, so long as you see it as a snake, you can have an idea it's false, but still the fear is there, because to you it looks very much like a snake. You're not ready yet to go close enough. Only when you're strongly convinced that it is not a snake, but the appearance of the snake is false, do you have the courage to go close enough to see what it actually is. And it's only when you actually see it as a rope that the problem is solved. Merely being told, oh, it's not a snake, it's a rope, we can't believe that. To us it looks very much like a snake. Yes. And we're not going to risk going close to it until we get a strong conviction. That strong conviction comes as a result of, firstly, the teachings of the Guru, thinking about them, but most of all, merely reading Bhagavan's teachings and thinking about them is not sufficient, because the problem lies in us as this ego. It's such a deep-rooted problem. So the only solution is to turn our attention back to ourselves. The more we turn our attention back to ourselves, the greater clarity we get, the more conviction we get. But my existence as this ego, as this person, is just an apparition. It's not true, it's not real. We get more and more conviction. But the conviction is not the goal. We don't want merely to be convinced that we're not this ego. We want to know what we actually are, because only when we know what we actually are will the ego be destroyed. Conviction is for the ego. Our real nature needs no conviction. Because our real nature is immutable, no change, it's perfect as it is.
All right, okay. So our real nature is constant, pure, eternal.
Yes.
It's there, and
yeah.
it's been there, and it can never go away.
Yes.
And we have this aberration, or this little thing called the ego.
We seem to have.
Ah, yes.
Because it's always important to remember, though we seem to be this ego, it's only a seeming, it's not what actually exists. The ego has never existed.
And it's a conviction in the brain, only in the mind.
Yes, and the mind is the ego. So the ego being convinced that I don't exist, the ego is never convinced that I am this. The ego can never be convinced that it doesn't exist. We say it, oh, there's no ego, the ego is unreal, but that's what we experience as ourselves.
Why can't hypnosis not solve the problem?
Because hypnosis it's all in the mind. You can suggest, hypnosis works on suggestion, doesn't it?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's how hypnosis works. You suggest an idea to someone, and they see things as they are. Someone has a phobia, say, of dogs, say, and they go to a hypnotherapist, and the hypnotherapist says, here's an idea. Slowly, by suggestion, it gets a person to overcome that phobia of dogs. That's how hypnosis works. But no hypnosis is going to work in this, because who is being hypnotized? It's the ego. The ego is the problem. There cannot be any solution other than the ego turning within and seeing what it actually is. And when it sees what it actually is, it sees it was never the ego. It was always our real nature, pure self-awareness. Yes. Well, we'll absorb it fully, with full clarity, only when we actually turn within and lose ourselves. Yes?
So, when you are saying turn ourselves internally,
sorry?
When you say turn ourselves internally,
yes.
In my practical experience, I find that everything that comes from the mind as pleasure or pain, that we constantly surrender to God. Right? Every moment, every second, every day, every night, day and night, and everything that happens around you, keep surrendering to the God. The attachment to the pleasure and the pain that vanishes, and neither the pain or the pleasure that sticks with my mind. So mind becomes very tranquilent without any kind of attachment or hatred or anything with pleasure or pain.
To a certain...
So maybe at those points, at each of those points, the ego becomes inactive. And when the ego becomes inactive, maybe there are various points, infinite points. I don't know when they will connect all the dots, but I don't want to even worry about whether the dots are getting connected. But in this moment, in this second, every second, you keep surrendering everything to Bhagavan, everything to
Bhagavan. We can surrender things other than ourselves. We can surrender our likes, our dislikes, to a certain extent, not completely, because so long as the ego is there, it will have likes and dislikes, it will experience pleasure and pain, all these things. But to a certain extent, we can surrender things other than ourselves. But how to surrender, what we ultimately need to surrender is ourself, this ego. That's why it's called self-surrender, Atma-samarpanam. We're surrendering ourselves. The Atma in Atma-samarpanam is not the real, it is the ego samarpanam. So we've got to surrender ourselves. How we can give up everything else, how to give up ourselves. Bhagavan has said the only way to give up oneself is because what we call ourself now is this ego, which is a wrong awareness of ourself. So it's only by knowing what we actually are, but only by experiencing ourselves as we actually are, but we can give up this false self-experience, this false self-awareness, the ego. That is why Bhagavan says in the 13th paragraph of Nāṉ Yār, in the first sentence, Anma chintane tavira, vera chintane kalambavadaku, satram idum kodamal, Atmanishta paranai irapade, Tanne isanaku alipadam. That is, giving no room, not giving not even the slightest room to the rising of any thought other than Atma-chintana. Atma-chintana literally means thought of oneself. That means self-attentiveness. So not attending to anything other than oneself, and not giving room to awareness of anything other than oneself, and thereby being fixed as oneself, being firmly established in oneself as oneself, that is giving oneself to God. So it's only by this turning our attention within, and within doesn't mean just in, people think thoughts are within the mind, so if you're watching your thoughts you're introverted. That is not what Bhagavan means by introverted. What Bhagavan means by, Bhagavan clarifies, Antamukha means ahamukam. Ahamukam means facing I alone. Everything other than I is outside. Every thought, every feeling, where does it come from? It's not there always. It arises from within us. The ego rises and it projects all these other things. All these are external. It's only by facing ourselves alone. That's what in Tamil is called ahamukam. Aha has two meanings in Tamil. Aham is both, in Sanskrit, aham is the first person pronoun I. In Tamil, aham has another meaning from Tamil origin, which means inside, or inner. So ahamukam means facing inside or facing I. It's got a double meaning in Tamil. That's why Bhagavan used that word deliberately, because of the double meaning. What is meant by facing inside is facing ourself alone. Facing everything other than ourselves is extraneous, external to ourselves. So only facing ourselves, that is the ahamukam, that is the introversion, that is truly facing within. When in that verse 44 of Akramai, Tirumbi ahandane, aham means inside, it also means I. So turning inside, Tane dinamaha kankan, seeing oneself. So we shouldn't attend to anything other than ourselves. That alone is the completion of surrender. We can surrender our likes and dislikes. We can even surrender the worldly life, and we can become a sannyasi or whatever. We can give up so many things external to ourselves. That's relatively easy. But giving up the surrenderer, surrender the surrenderer, that is the point. How to surrender the one who is surrendering?
That is the end point. We don't reach the end point.
But we should keep the end point in view. We have an aim. We got to aim for that. Bhagavan doesn't want us to aim for anything less, because anything less than that is not a solution. The problem is the ego. Why we have desires, why we have all the fear, why we have anger, why we have all these things. It's because of the ego. Who has desire? Who has fear? Who has anger? Who has jealousy? Who has all these bad qualities? It's only the ego. So the ego, that's why Bhagavan's whole teaching is stressing, the whole problem is this ego. The ego is nothing but a wrong awareness of ourselves. The solution to the ego is a correct awareness of ourselves. So why we rise at this ego? Bhagavan says, Urupatriundam, by grasping form it comes into existence, this ego. Grasping form means the ego is formless itself. It takes the forms of other things. It grasps other forms. Grasping means it's aware of things other than itself. So long as we're facing towards anything other than ourselves, we seem to be this ego. Only when we turn back and face ourselves alone, the ego will be dissolved. Bhagavan is the perfect doctor, because he's diagnosed what is the absolute root cause of all the problems. It is this ego. And what is the solution? It is turning within. And when we think about Bhagavan's teachings, it's all perfectly logical. Now we seem to be this body, but can we really be this body? Because if I am this body and are identical, I cannot be aware of I without being aware of this body. But in dream I'm aware of I without being aware of this body. I'm aware of some other body. In sleep I'm aware of I. I'm not aware of any body. So I cannot be anything that appears and disappears, in my view, cannot be myself. Because I am the one to whom it appears and disappears. So all these things that appear and disappear are not what we really are. So what we really are is only the basic awareness. We can understand that by logic. So, but now we experience ourselves as this body. The I that experiences itself as I am this body is a false self-awareness. That is called ego. So how to get rid of this false self-awareness? Only by being aware of ourselves as we actually are. How to be aware of ourselves as we actually are? We have to look at ourselves. If you want to see the sun, how to see the sun? There's only one way to see the sun, you have to look at it. People say, what is the method? What is the method for seeing the sun? You look at it. What is the method for knowing yourself? Look at yourself. Obviously, we don't look with our eyes because we have formed. Our attention has to be turned within. Only by looking at ourselves, we'll see ourselves. And only by seeing ourselves, we'll get rid of this ego. It's all, Bhagavan's teachings are so simple and so logical. Very, very easy to understand. But for most of us, it's very difficult to accept. Why is it difficult to accept? Because we're attached to ourselves as this body. We're attached to our false beliefs, our erroneous view. We're so much attached to it. Because we think that we get happiness from all these things. Who's ready to give up? We're not ready. We're not yet ready to surrender ourselves. That's why it's so difficult for us to accept Bhagavan's teaching. If we were ready to surrender ourselves here and now, we could do so. Why we haven't surrendered? Because we're not willing to do so yet. So that's why we follow this path.
To be practical, Michael, what happens is you have a piece of cake. You're eating the cake. What will go in your mind at that time? Are you going to enjoy the cake, or are you going to desire for one more piece of cake? What do you want to do? What is your state of mind? At
every moment in our life, we have this choice.
Are you going to say, I'm going to turn inward and not eat the cake, or I'm going to turn inward and...
What is eating the cake? It's the body eating the cake. So whether you turn inwards or outwards makes no difference. If the cake is destined to be eaten, if this body is destined to eat the cake, it will eat the cake. But it's you, the one who says, I am this body, that's the problem. That's where the doership comes from. Because we experience this body as I. At every moment in our life, we have a choice. Either we allow our mind to go outwards, to experience all these cakes and all these other wonderful things, along with all the pleasures and pains that inevitably come along with it, the stomachache that we get next day after we've eaten too much cake, all these things. If we allow our mind to, either we allow our mind to go outwards, or we turn it within. Every moment of our life, we have that choice. 99% of the time, we're making the wrong choice. We allow our mind to go outwards. At least 1% of the time we're trying to turn it within, if we're following Bhagavan's path, that is. So that 1% we have to slowly increase to 2%, 3%, 4%. Slowly, Sadhguru used to tell a nice story. There was a poor Arab who was, maybe he was a trader or something. He used to travel through the desert with his camel, and he would carry some goods and he'd go and trade it in the town, and that's how he made his living. So in the desert it's very, very hot in the daytime, but at night it becomes very, very cold. So when the sun went down, he put up his little tent, and he got inside the tent and he tied the camel outside. In the middle of the night, he woke up and he found the camel's nose is in the tent beside him. Then he thought, poor creature, he's carrying all me and all these other things in the daytime, and it's cold outside, so let at least his nose be warm. And after, so he went back to sleep again. Next time when he woke up, the whole head of the camel was inside. And he, again, okay, poor creature, let it be. He went back to sleep again. Next time he woke up, the feet were inside also. By the morning he woke up, the camel had occupied the whole tent and he was outside. So also, we have to, Sadhuam said, we have to give a little room in our heart to following what Bhagavan said, which is turning our attention within. Daily we have to do it. Daily means, ultimately daily means constantly, but at least we have to start off. Each day we have to make a little effort. At least 1% of the time in the day we can spend trying to turn within. That's the camel's nose. Then we increase it to 2%, that's the first foot. 3% the second foot. In other words, we have to slowly, slowly let Bhagavan occupy our heart. Bhagavan is what? How we let Bhagavan occupy our heart? By turning our attention inwards, by following what Bhagavan taught us. Because that is the only way we'll get rid of the ego. We'll be pushed out of the tent, this ego will be pushed out of the tent only if we allow Bhagavan to enter. And we allow Bhagavan to enter only by attending to ourselves.
Actually, there is a you're talking about cakes, eating cakes.
That's one example.
Yeah. But if you saw your beloved coming towards you, you'd throw that cake away and run towards him, wouldn't you? Imagine a child eating a cake, nanny, etc. And they didn't see their mother. And they suddenly saw their mother coming towards them. They'd throw the cake away and run towards the mother.
Yeah.
You know, your cake was gone.
It doesn't affect my mind whether it's tasting good or not.
Can't have his cake and eat it.
We say we're not affected, we are affected by everything. So if we turn our attention outside, everything, we are being affected in some way or other. We'll be deluding ourselves to say we're not affected, but we can just carry on as we are. None of us are satisfied, none of us are contented. So are we going to allow ourselves just to remain as we are, or are we going to try to progress on this path? We've had the supreme good fortune that Bhagavan has come into our life and given us these teachings. If we really love Bhagavan, if we really appreciate the gift he's given us, we should at least try to put it into practice. At least 1% of the time. Allow at least the camel's nose to enter, for a start. Yes.
I find it very easy to go there and feel peaceful, but the everyday life demands outside focus all the time, and that is what I find really difficult.
It seems to us that the outside world demands our attention. But we cannot get on in this life without attending to external things. According to Bhagavan, whatever is to happen is going to happen. Whatever is not to happen is not going to happen, whether we attend to it or not. So actually no attention is needed. But though we may we may understand that at a superficial level of our mind. None of us are convinced. We think it is necessary for us to do. This is what Bhagavan, the analogy Bhagavan gave of a person traveling in a train carrying their luggage on their head. When you're traveling on a train, whether you've got the luggage on your head or whether you put it down beside you, the train is carrying the luggage. But we don't have faith in the train. The train is Bhagavan. We don't have faith in the train, but the train is going to carry all the burdens. So we want to carry our own little luggage on our head. We think, what will happen if I don't attend to this work? What will happen if I don't do this? Because of our lack of faith in Bhagavan, we think it's necessary for us to attend to our external life. And so we have, if we had complete faith in Bhagavan, let him take care of my external life. What does it matter anyway, whether his body lives or dies? If we really had so much faith in him, but we don't.
Really? I mean, like, I need to go to work, I need to pay my bills, I need to...
This is exactly what Bhagavan says. Bhagavan, you're quoting Bhagavan now, because what Bhagavan says here is, Sakala Karyangalayam Oru Parameshwara Shakti Naditi Kondiru Tirupadiyal. That is, since the one supreme Parameshwara Shakti, that means the supreme ruling power, is doing all the actions, or making all the actions happen, since it's making everything happen, Namum Adaku Adangi Irama. Instead of us surrendering to that, or subsiding and just being, surrendering to that, Ipadisaya vendum, apadisaya vendum. Ipadisaya vendum means I must do like this. Apadisaya vendum, I must do like that. Actually, there's no I there. It's just, it's necessary to do this. It's necessary to do that. Endru sada chimpetu ain. Why should we always be thinking? It's necessary to do this, it's necessary to do that. According to Bhagavan, it is not necessary to do anything. But none of us are... Does anyone here believe that? None of us believe it. Okay, we may say, okay, I believe it, but it's only at our superficial level of our mind. If we really believed it, we would give up thinking about anything. Why we think, the only reason we think about anything is because of our lack of faith in Bhagavan. Because we don't trust Bhagavan. Bhagavan has said, that Parameshwara Shakti, that supreme power, is making everything happen as it's meant to happen. So the work you have to do, it will be done. Why should you think you have to do it?
I love that, thank you.
But it's very easy to say the words and to understand it at a superficial level, but it's got to become a deep-rooted conviction. That will become a deep-rooted conviction only to the extent that our mind is purified and clarified. Our mind will be purified and clarified only to the extent that we actually put Bhagavan's teachings into practice. But we actually surrender, we actually do vichara.
I've learned to stand up about 5 minutes before you.
Okay, so from suffering, we end up here.
Yes.
Back to suffering again.
Can I just add an addendum, a postscript? Some people find it a bit, I don't know what the word is. Some people don't understand why you quote the Tamil things of text before you give an answer. Can you explain? Because you've got a very good reason for that.
Well, firstly, Bhagavan's words have their own power. Secondly, people quote Bhagavan, or Bhagavan said this, Bhagavan said, we can see all over the internet so many quotations of things that Bhagavan is supposed to have said. But these are actual authentic, these are words that Bhagavan himself wrote.
Yes.
And Bhagavan's own words had their own power.
Yes.
We can translate them, but no translation can give the raw power of Bhagavan's original words. So it's partly for authenticity, partly, and I never quote things without explaining what it means. But it's also, there are Tamilians here, people who actually understand Bhagavan's words in Tamil, and when these are filmed and when it goes on YouTube, there are many Tamilians also watch it. But even if it's, I mean, still, we have to value Bhagavan's words. Bhagavan's own original writings have so much, his own words have so much value.
So that's a very good answer.
Right.
Thank you. No more questions on that one.